Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another exciting episode of Let's Talk Comics, the official Image Comics podcast that goes one-on-one with your favorite creators in comics to find out how they got in, why they got in, what they're still doing, and what they've got coming up. I am your host, Jim Viscardi, and today's guest is no exception. This is someone who I have had the pleasure of knowing for a really long time. He and I first met and spoke when he was working on his first Image book, Five Ghosts. And then he took a sojourn, went into the world of video games for a little while, and is now back with a pretty cool new Image book that we are going to get into and talk all about. I am talking to the one, the only, Mr. Frank Barbiere. Frank has such a really cool, interesting story because of when he got started and kind of how he got started, who he got started with, and then the kind of things and tough lessons he had to learn along the way, and what kind of switching mediums as a writer is like, and what you learn in that process. And now, like I said, he returns to Image more poised, I guess, to say, in the book we're going to talk about is The Author Immortal. It's a book he's doing with Morgan Beam, and to hear him talk about how he came up with the project, how he sees the project going, this is a book that he wants to be doing for the long haul. He wants this to be the next great ongoing series that fans can own, in a sense. He wants people to come in and join him at this first issue and just go along for the ride, and hopefully 60 issues in, look back and be like, man, I was there at the very beginning. The Author Immortal is a bold metafictional portal fantasy that asks what happens when the stories we love won't let us go. And it feels like this is the perfect time to put out a book like this. And so I'm going to let him talk about it. You'll hear me ask the questions. But first, if you're listening to the show, please do me a quick favor. Take a screenshot if you're listening to this on a phone, or hey, if you're in a car, not driving, but take a picture of the stereo and share it with us on social media. Let us know you're listening. Otherwise, you can leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or a 5-star rating on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. It goes a long way to helping the show out, and I really do appreciate everyone who has done so thus far. All right. Well, if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's talk comics. Frank, welcome, buddy.
Thank you so much. And as we said, it doesn't feel that long, but also feels like a million years. And wowza, you saying 2014 is a feeling.
It's honestly, like I've said this a bunch of times on the show. One of my favorite things about doing this is getting to catch up again with people I spoke to during the first run of the show, and to catch up like where they are now. And it's been kind of wild because like even like on that first run, I spoke to folks who were well into their career, but also a lot of folks who were just starting out. And like, so I'm sorry to say, Frank, but you are now one of those folks who are well into your career. you are one of the old timers. Welcome.
No, it's funny because I feel like for the longest time you're like a new person,
right?
And constantly like I remember my friends making fun of me because I was like 29 and like in a Marvel solicit it was like new young writer Frank Barbiere, and I'm like, oh yeah, soon to be old man writer. But no, it's really nice to feel at this point in my career and be able to look back and like, oh wow, and one thing that I'm not shy about saying, which is so funny with Five Ghosts, is truly like Eric Stevenson emailing me to approve Five Ghosts was like a hinge point in my life of everything that has happened since is because of that. And one thing that I will constantly say, and I will not overly drop other comic creators, but it's very funny that in those preceding like, how long has it been? I'm going to out myself as bad at math, like 12 to 15 years for a lot of us, but like so many of my peers who I was breaking in with have had long careers now, have gotten in. But I always remember I was on the phone with W. Maxwell Prince, who was actually my roommate in college and my friend for a long, long time,
Oh,
way before he broke it with Ice Cream Man. And I think I was complaining about like not getting an email back when Eric emailed me to approve Five Ghosts, and I was like, "Will, I gotta go. I think my book's happening." And it's just so funny as again looking at where he's at now and doing great, and again, so many of my friends just have made it happen, which is so cool to see.
Right. All right. So we gotta start at the beginning. The first question I ask everyone for this show is, was comics always the goal, or is there a alternate timeline, Frank, where he was just doing something, a pharmacist? Is there like, what was this
the one where
the goal?
My parents are so happy in that timeline? But no, weirdly, yes. Like I talk about this a lot. Like I was a kid of the 90s more. Again, I was born in 84, so I don't like saying I was an 80s kid, but like for me, like you could throw a rock and hit a comic book store when I was like 10 years old. So I was constantly going to them. First monthly book I've read was X-Men 2099. Funny enough, like I bought every issue in shops. Like got the Batman animated series, the X-Men animated series when I was a kid, and comics were just really around. And funny enough, on top of that, is I lived a town over from the Joe Kubert Art School, which again has proven kind of instrumental in my life, as I met Chris Mooneyham, who drew Five Ghosts there. But I like took lessons there when I was like a little kid. I'm a horrible artist, so it did not pan out, but I always did love comic books. And I guess it fell off a little like when I was in middle school and like probably like the 90s, like later crash. But then right when it must have been around 99, I found a comic book store called New World Manga, which is still there in Livingston, New Jersey, where I would go every week and I could actually drive. And that's where I discovered like Powers. That's where Ultimate Spider-Man was starting, Grant Morrison on X-Men. Like, and that's when I became a real monthly comics reader. And then I went to college, and I always liked writing stories in school, but I hadn't really thought about being a comic book writer. Like, I don't think I knew how it worked, but despite reading Image Comics, I read a magazine entry in Wizard, probably right around when I was taking screenwriting, about how Image was all submissions driven. I was like, oh, holy crap. Like, I can take more money out of my student loans, hire comic book artists, and publish comics. Like, what am I doing? Like, I'm never going to sell a movie, because I think that earlier writer strike happened around then, the one where like Lost got cut off and things like that. I can't remember the year, but like, and that's why I was like, oh wait, why am I trying to put effort into write movies? I love comic books. And again, I was reading Month and everything, and just kind of started there. I immediately made a very bad pitch and sent it to Eric Larson. He was very kind. It was like, this is okay, but like probably not what we're doing. And just since then, just kept going for it and pushing and trying to learn. And again, it just ended up making a lot of sense because I like telling stories. I loved comics. But so I'd been around it my whole life, but it wasn't until really that moment it clicked that it was something that I could do. And I grew up in bands, and like in punk rock, it was very into just like do it yourself. So it was like, oh, like I love this idea of like, I don't need a company to hire me. Like I go make my thing and then they put it out. And it just made a lot of sense. So
right.
Still paying back those college loans, though. So, that was not a great idea, but what you got to do.
Okay, so we'll fast forward a little bit. So you get the email from Eric Stevenson. Five Ghosts is good to go, and you hit the ground running. Was that experience what you expected it to be?
Yes, because I had been like circling it for so long at that point, like probably actively trying to break in for like 4 or 5 years and just going to cons. And again, Matt Rosenberg is a dear friend of mine who broke in along with me, and we would just like really be out there. And we met so many people who, again, like Mike Morisi, Ed Brisson, like all people who were getting their first books, but were out there at shows being our peers. And it was a really wonderful time. And what I wasn't ready for was that era. Like Five Ghosts came out in March of 2013, and like Saga was going super hard. East of West had just started our same month, and like Image was doing phenomenal. So that helped us so much, get so much visibility, and basically make it my full-time job. Because for the longest time, people were like, you'll do a book and maybe make like beer money. Like, good luck with that. Like, don't quit your day job. But Five Ghosts did tremendously well in that time period. And allowed me to quickly become a full-time writer and then just start working everywhere. And because there were a lot of eyes on it, people were paying attention. You get emails back after emailing everyone for years and years.
Right.
So I wasn't prepared for how quickly it would move in terms of that. Like I knew kind of the logistics of it, like because of having put in the due diligence, but it was a crazy time. And talking to so many people who've like broken in, or students, I love to teach and talk to young people, but like who tried to like kind of get in at different eras following that, where it's very different, is unique to me and makes me realize, I think, a little more like how special that time was for the industry and how well things were going, just because of that all ships kind of rising situation. But that was wild, and really just like, again, for the next like 5 or 6 years, I was just doing full-time comics for the most part and just jumping everywhere I can, series to series. And Five Ghosts was great, as we ended up doing 17 issues and a one shot. So I wish I could say that only took us 17 months, but it did not. It took us a little longer than that. But it was a really like humbling experience to be able to do a long run on our own book. And for better or worse, like as I still am proud of the work we did, but was like kind of growing up in front of everyone. Like we had never written a monthly, like produced a monthly comic. My collaborator Chris Mooney, Lauren Affey, and I, like, and we just had to learn to do it. And thank God it wasn't atrocious, but like I look back now and just think of like, oh my gosh, if I could have known what I was doing differently or things like that. And I also lettered the book myself. So again, I had learned to do that early on, and it was a really just like, again, crazy, fun, teachable experience that we're just so thankful that resonated with people as well.
Right. What do you think maybe were one or two of the biggest takeaways from that experience, whether it's, you know, was the process of the book or maybe feedback that you've gotten from some other folks as you were in that breaking in process?
I will say this not as a like sad trombone, but like people won't like everything you write, because like Five Ghosts being one of the most first things we put out, like I'm just like, wow, every book is going to do this. And again, I love everything I've done, but to see the different responses just based on the market, where things are, like if they're miniseries and ongoing, that was the most humbling thing to me, being like, oh, like you're just not set. Like you're not Alan Moore just because you did one okay book. Like, you know, like it takes a long time. And I feel like I remember even like Scott Snyder or someone saying early on, like careers are long. Like you have to really think about it. And in just that longevity of like, it always feels like you're breaking in a little bit. Like you're never so perfectly there. There's always that next hurdle you're looking towards. And thankfully we took that in stride, but it was tough, definitely, as you're around longer and longer. And just there's that feeling of like sometimes you find lightning in a bottle and you can never like predict or construct that. And for me, it made a lot of sense to just like think of people I loved who had long careers, and just talking about different books and different moments. And it suddenly was like, oh, okay, yeah, like sometimes things hit, sometimes they don't. And you just have to get back on the horse and keep working.
Right.
And that, and then just also like, I guess like, I'm trying to think of a second thing, but just how much stuff also stays the same, because comics is a great industry because you can be, quote, comic book famous, but like no one's gonna recognize you on the street for the most part. Like no one's gonna pull me aside in public and be like, oh my God, Five Ghosts. Like it's just not in the cards. So like it is like you like step away from it. Like conventions is really where it's like the most. And during that era, we did so many conventions, like just the whole team, because that is our lifeblood and where we could do, and tons of retail signings. Like we love comic book retailers. We want to go to stores as much as we can. And there's like something nice about being able to disengage from that, though. Like you walk away and like no one's like beating down your door. You're not the Beatles or somebody. Like you're just a normal person, and the work is the work. The work stays the same. And I'm a very self-serious, like studious person. Like I love reading about writing. I love working and getting better. And like by design, looking back at my old work and being like, oh, like what did I learn from that? Like how did I grow? And the one thing that stays the same is the job is still, you sit down and you write a script and you give it to a collaborator. Like that never changes. Like sometimes there's more people involved, but I do love that about it, that it feels the same. And especially when doing like our image books, where it is very small team, it still just feels like garage comics. It feels like it's the 3 or 4 of us, we're doing it, and then oh wait, it just happens to come out too. And that is always exciting to me because, as I said, I like feeling like some ownership like that, and just that it's our fun thing that we're working on that isn't just work proper.
Mm-hmm. Well, so because it's interesting because like you were able to take all of the writing experience that you had doing all the comics work that you had done, and then you made a jump to the world of video games. And what was that jump maybe initially like for you, and what, you know, after that, like what were some of like the big like oh shit kind of moments maybe in
Well, it's funny because we talked about like, oh, did you always want to do comics? And it was always around a little bit. But the other part is like, I've loved video games my whole life and grew up like a little bit of like Nintendo. But like, I feel like Super Nintendo was like my console when like
Sure.
I really was like probably like 8 and that hit. And I loved like a lot of like more so like the JRPGs like Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 3/6 and things like that. Like those are pieces of work that actually really made me want to be a writer looking back at them, because they were like really intriguing stories that like brought me in told in limited ways. And so I always loved that, but and loved video games and saw them grow and become almost like these basically Hollywood productions by the time I was an adult. And my best friend since we were in like high school, I met him like the first week of high school, was actually the audio director at Naughty Dog. And I would ask him about video games. He'd be like, dude, you can't write video games. Because again, in his purview, though, like the game directors writing the games, like, is a very serious operation. They're not just going to grab some comic book writer and be like, hey, write Last of Us. And so I always listened to him and would check in, but he had a very different view. And so I was deep in comics, full-time comics, and it was very stressful. Like, again, it's your dream job and you want to do it, but you fight for relevance. You're always like trying to stay current, come up with the next thing. And I really got into a churn where I feel very fortunate that I was doing a lot of creator-owned books, but I was doing a lot of mini-series, which it almost felt like every 6 months I had to reinvent myself and invent a new book and hope people liked it. And it really took a toll on me. Like I was just like stressed out, and it was all my income, and my partner was working in the creative arts as well. So like we moved from New York City to Savannah, Georgia, which was thankfully much cheaper, but it just got to a point where I was feeling more stress than joy from the work, and kind of like I went to school to be a teacher and originally was a teacher. I'm like, oh my God, like, am I got to teach again? Like, what should I do? Like, are my 15 minutes up? Like what's happening? And again, it's woe is me. It sounds like, but it was a very stressful time.
But I think that's one of those things that like, I think everyone kind of comes to a bit of a crossroads like that, or has like that weird crisis of faith where like, look, even before I made the jump to Image, like it was one of those, like I wanted to get back in comics and I loved it, but like when doing the stuff I did at comicbook.com was so near and dear to me, because like it was my baby. We sold it or whatever, but like it was the thing I had helped start.
We had true entrepreneurship. Like you went in there and
but it was burning me the hell out, right?
And I was right, like that's the like, oh, like you get your dream job, but it's so much work, and people don't tend to notice that part. They're just like, that's awesome, man. It's like, yeah, and you don't want to be that sad sack who's like, is it? But like, it really does. And again, I'm sure you know this too from your own life. It's one of those things too where there's never a good time, because I feel like when I teach a lot, like students are always like, well, when do you know? I'm like, you don't. You just do it and hope it works, and like. Like you try to like set up some safety nets where you can, but it is never a good time. Like even when I left to go full time into comics, like I definitely shouldn't have. I was not making nearly enough money and still living in New York City, but like I'm glad I did, because it allowed opportunities. But but so yeah, I was really looking for something with a little more stability. And I had just done like, I was part of the like, I can't remember what they called it. It was like the all new Marvel Again line, but it was like when Tom King did Vision, which crushed it, and going into like Secret Wars. And I had written a little bit with John Hickman into Avengers, which was a fantastic experience for me. I loved the stuff I did on Avengers World. And then I did Howling Commandos, which got canceled after about 6 issues. And I really like, I was just like, oh crap, I thought this was going to be like my book and we were going to go forward. And again, no one's fault, just the business of direct market comics. And I feel like I just lost steam there. And long story short is I was at San Diego Comic-Con and talking to a dear friend of mine named Sean Kittleson, who has written Mortal Kombat games and the Injustice games. And I knew him because he was writing Mortal Kombat comics. And we went out to lunch, with his friend TJ Fixman, who had written at Insomniac forever and done like Ratchet and Clank. And I was like, holy crap, you guys wrote video games? That's awesome. And like, how did you even get into that? And Sean was just like, dude, you have like a writing career. You could like apply to game writing jobs. Like, it's not. And again, couldn't think of my buddy Rob, who's like, no, you'll never get one. And again, I make fun of him all the time for that, but he was right in his own limited way. But
sure.
But Sean just really set me straight and like was like, yeah, like just start talking to recruiters. And like, it took a year after that of like intense networking and meeting people and like really just trying to like find the differences. Because I'm very much someone who celebrates like writing is writing. Like if you can learn your craft, like you can apply it to kind of different mediums with obviously some intelligence and thoughtfulness, but it's not so divorced. And especially games where you're basically writing screenplays, funny enough, for most things, like you're not doing game design documents. You are, especially for me, I am a writer, not someone who is like doing level design or narrative design, they call it. Like I'm not doing systems for like interactions in games. But yeah, I got very fortunate that I met someone who worked at an Activision company that was working on Destiny 2 eventually. And he was like, hey, if you can move up to Albany next week, you could work on Destiny 2 with me. And I had to be like my partner, like, hey, we're going to move up to Albany. And talking about good friends, Steve Orlando is one of my dear friends and actually lived up there and had introduced me to this person. And I just like owe Steve fruit baskets every year as he let me come live at his house for like a month or two while we got settled up there and things like that. And again, and from there, it was just keeping the ball rolling. And it was nice to just have a paycheck and health insurance again after being a freelancer for almost 8 years. And again, it really slowed my comics output, and not so much because the work was so demanding. I was very burnt out. I had done so much stuff and just kind of felt almost like, not that it was only about money, but I just didn't have a drive of any book I really, really want to do. Like, and I did a few things, and I started co-writing while I was doing that. But switching to games was really cool. As games is a much more collaborative medium where the writer is a lot more in the background. A lot of teams have many writers. I've had an interesting career in video games where I've been pretty much the only person on most of my writing teams. Like, but again, still collaborating with the game directors, with other people. Right. And then just the fact that what you're writing is becoming a product people play, it gets transformed. But it really was fun to do the same thing, kind of like a comic where you're writing scripts that become something visual, become something out there. And the biggest thing to me was getting to work with actors, though, to do voice acting, which has been tremendous for me to help with dialogue, as like comic dialogue is so fascinating because it's read, and like I think that can do a lot of heavy lifting for you as a writer, especially when you're newer. Like
that was going to be the big thing I was going to ask, right? Like, you know, writing a comic and writing a video, like your audience is engaging with the material in such different ways, right? And so what is the, like, what's the biggest difference outside of necessarily being read or whatever, but like what are some of the things that, you know, work in comics that don't work in games, but maybe work in games that don't work in comics?
I will start with a similarity, because this is something that I've, again, preached to a lot of like young people who are getting in about writing games, because there's almost like two lenses to it. There's that designer brain, like I am creating an interactive experience, and then there's the writer brain. And what I love about writing games is you are still doing the same thing almost that you do when you're writing a comic and not writing the dialogue, where you're controlling like the pacing and the experience. That's what a game script kind of works on. And even when you're writing, like even when I wrote Destiny stuff, you write a script that's just like the player walks forward, the player sees this glacier, they look in the glacier, and you don't know they're definitely going to do that, but you're kind of controlling the situation around them, which really does, it's just good storytelling. It's writing scenes, and that stuff kind of translates one-to-one, and I think helped a lot, because a few people have kind of gotten involved, especially at Activision. I know they were bringing in a few comic writers, and I think that's something that comic writers can do really well. They know that sense of kind of pacing and scene work that can be visual and be shown. But on the dialogue side, as we were saying, like, you are writing for voice actors at that point, and many of them are super good at their job, and that is something you don't get when you're writing comics. And yes, everyone should read their dialogue out loud when they're doing it, but I don't think everyone does. And the minute you get into a booth and someone reads a line out loud and like trips over it, you're like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. Like that just sounds bad. I should have read that out loud before I sent it. But really, really teachable in terms of what you're able to pull off with like subtext and like actual acting cues. Because I remember talking with a game director I worked with, like, who wanted the script to kind of almost be louder, like almost like everyone say cooler sounding things. But like the amazing thing about acting is like, oh, someone could say hello 5,000 different ways. And if we give them the right acting note and they're a good actor, it can really sell that. And as a really interesting counterpoint, I feel like where we get that and to bring it a little bit to Author Immortal is like with lettering as well. And I'm so fortunate to work with Hassan Atmane Elhau, like, who does so much lettering design now and like actually will do like crazy balloon design, like different text design to kind of get that similar type inflection in the same way that actor could kind of take words and do it. I think that's where we can really get it in comics as well. But truly that's been very teachable to me in games. I've worked with a tremendous amount of voice talent. Like I wrote a League of Legends game with Joe Madureira at Airship Syndicate, and again a fantastic writer named oh my God, I'm forgetting Laura's last name like an idiot. I'm so embarrassed. I'm forgetting my friend's last name because I've not thought of her in a minute. But again, she was an editor at Riot who co-wrote the game as well, and lots of other little people contributing. But we ended up working with a tremendous voice cast who Mache. Laura Mache is her name. Jeez.
Here we go.
In one ear, out the other. Who just released an amazing game called Skin Deep. But it was fantastic because we had a lot of like critical role actors on our staff for the lead game. And like, again, Laura Bailey was our lead and just like phenomenal voice actors. Like I cannot even begin to like say like how fun it is to hear someone who is at the top of their craft reading your script. And again, it was very, very teachable to me. And I think a lot of this has come into Author Immortal. It is, especially issue 1 is one of the more talky books I've ever done, but like, I feel like purposefully so. And I've shipped 4 games, Destiny 2, Warmind, Darksiders Genesis, and then Ruined King, a League of Legends story. And then I just worked on a game called Behemoth, which is a VR game at Skydance that, yet again, I wrote like 98% of it, which was crazy. And with a fantastic narrative director named Hall Hood there, who I work closely with. And I think one of the things that comics does help with is the collaboration. Like as I said, there's a million more people in games versus just a small team on comics. But if you are a collaborative person, I think people really love that because sometimes they'll hire writers who will just come drop a script on everybody and be like, whatever, see ya. And like, no one really gets the vibe, but I'm very like touchy-feely. Like, I want everyone to know like what's happening. Let's talk about this. Like, these are the themes. And it comes from a place of, and I say this in some game, people cringe, but I'm like, yo, you're working on this game for 2 to 5 years. If you play the shipped game and hate the story and you never told me, I will feel so bad because you literally just committed, like your discipline might be so far removed and you can never please everybody. But I'm always like, I'd rather hear it from my team than you ship a product and someone's like, this character sucks or something like that. But no, it's been wild. And the main thing it gave me too is like some distance to think about the comics projects I really want to do because I was no longer like, oh my gosh, like truly like practical things. Like if I don't write 4 scripts, I can't pay my rent and things like that. And while everyone tries to do the best they can, like that kind of start of your brain is not conducive to making good work, in my opinion. Like, obviously you will make work and still care about it, but like, there's just a stressor there. And I think that's when you start looking back and be like, oh man, if I only had time to go back and do this. And while working in games, I co-wrote a few books. I did a book called Astonishing Times at Comixology Originals with, Rory Coleman, Eris Canonis, Lauren Affey, and then Andrew Kramer and Reese Hannigan jumped on the second volume. And that was really fun because it was also Eris, who's the host of the YouTube show Variant, his first comic book. And I was like, I never want to write superhero stuff that's not from Marvel or DC. And he really wanted to. And we found a way in. Like, I was excited to do it. But then I did a book called Elixir with Ricky Mamone and Victor Santos, who's one of my favorite collaborators who I'd done Violent Love with. I have another book that we haven't announced yet that I co-wrote that'll be out in the fall. But like, it's funny because listening to Remender talk recently about a lot of the like kind of sort of co-writing, co-publishing work he did. He's like, yeah, like moving on from that now, but it was fun of a period. And I'm in the same way. Like I really did enjoy like working with other people, but it was like one, practically, it'd take a lot of the heavy lifting off myself when I couldn't fully commit. And two, like it got me re-excited. It got me excited again. Like again, hearing people who didn't do comics as much as I did, who hadn't seen their books out constantly, like feeling a little bit of that just like joy from the teams, like reminded me like, oh, this is a really cool thing. Like this is very exciting. It's fun. Like, and it's a medium I love. So I would never fully stop doing it. But through that all, it led me to just like think about like, okay, if I'm going to like come back and do an ongoing series, like what do I want to do? Like what will I feel like? It's dramatic to be like, what is the one book I want to write? But that's the point I was at in my career of like, hey, like I've done like a lot of genre work. Like I'm again a very practical writer who likes the puzzle of like, oh, okay, like if you're writing a mystery, how would you do it? But I really just sat down and had to think like, what is the book I want to do? And again, it is the project spoiler that has become Author Immortal. But
well, so, okay, so wait, so let's back up a little bit. So where does the seed for Author Immortal get planted? Is this like you're very clearly thinking about like, well, I want to make I want to get back into comics work. You presumably in air quotes have the time for it, right? But like, it's one of those things where instead of now just kind of taking whatever project, kind of comes your way, you're being way more thoughtful's not the right word, but intentional maybe about like what.
Yeah, I think that's the nice way to phrase it. Yeah, is intentional. Yeah.
About what you want to do, how you want to do it. And so I have to imagine a bunch of idea seeds get planted. How does Author Immortal be the one to, I don't know, sprout first, I guess, to continue on the analogy?
Well, it's interesting because, as I said, I will own it. Like, I felt very burned out. I was like, man, will I never have a good idea again? Like, and truly, like, also something to support an ongoing series. Like, there are a lot of ideas that can feel small and like almost like a film, like, right? Like a mini series almost feels like that to me. It's like a tight done in one. And I think there's a lot of joy in that, but there's a part of me that like reading comics too. I especially like, as I said, getting like very, very into comics in those formative late teenage years, like where I was going to the store every week. And it was like mid 2000s Vertigo was also like just so fantastic and transformative to me, like reading like Scalped for the first time and like as it was coming out too. Because again, there were some seminal works that I liked, but didn't feel like they were mine because they had come out and you're reading the collection. But like all those books, and again, just like everything and the Unwritten was huge to me, which again has a lot of DNA into the Author Immortal. But what's funny is, so all of that stuff was churning in the back of my head when I did Five Ghosts. And with Five Ghosts, I obviously love like metafiction and kind of like the world of the literary and like stuff that had been, I had not read it till after we did Five Ghosts, but stuff that was explored in Sandman, obviously, which was a huge touchstone for people. And Fables was another big one, and even League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. But I was a little shy about it when we came out with Five Ghosts because I didn't want to be like almost take like a huge swing and say like, this is a book that should go amongst some of these best comics ever written that are considered like literary works. What's up? And Five Ghosts was definitely also more of an action book, but the lore of it was very much like, where do stories come from? Like, how do they affect us? Like, what's there? So I feel like we got to kind of scratch that itch a little, but in like my heart of hearts, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's what fascinates me. Like, I love mythology. I love, again, I've read not as a flex, as just an interest. Like, I've read every book on writing I humanly can, because I think it's so fascinating how everyone approaches basically the same thing a little differently and what's there to learn. And I knew I wanted to do something like that. And over the years, like, there was like the seed of like a metafiction book that didn't feel wholly unique to me. And again, was obviously very inspired by the Unwritten of like, oh my gosh, I want to do a book about an author who wrote to basically keep his dying daughter alive, like created a fictional world for her that would keep her from dying. And that was his drive. And obviously it eventually goes wrong, but like, that's his impetus. And these books come out in the real world and they're fantasy books, but like, I didn't really have more than that. And, went around, gosh, so it must have been around 2020 when finally I got moving on this. And I had like jotted notes down around this before and thought like, oh, like what could this series be? But never took form. Or I would start like, I would reread like the Unwritten and be like, oh, well, the Unwritten is not quite about that, but it does deal with metafiction. It does deal with, again, where stories come from, how they affect us, and basically a secret cabal that controls, is using storytelling to try to like take over the world. And fantastic book. If you have not read it, go read it. It's a opus. It's top 3 for me, favorite comics of all time. Hugely influential. But in trying to find my way in, funny enough, I think we were trying to do something with Five Ghosts, but it didn't make it off the cutting room floor. But I was introduced to Morgan by Rye Hickman, and Rye was going to do something with us, and unfortunately, logistically, it didn't come together. But I think I emailed them back and was like, "Oh, what else are you free with?" And they were like, "Oh, I'm actually booked up, but my studio mate Morgan is looking for stuff." And they introduced me to Morgan, and I had seen Morgan's art in passing. Like I had seen the Twin Branches Swamp Thing book she had done, and I'd seen Family Trade, which was at Image. Again, because I'm a fan of Justin's, and know he always had a good eye for collaborators. But the minute I saw Morgan stuff, I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Like she should do this book because that's the tone I really want for it. And Morgan does full watercolor art, not all the time, but like I think that's her deep preference. And I saw that and just some missing pieces like filled into my brain. And at the time, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I know what to make this book about. That's not just the Unwritten. I want it to be about, again, how we engage with stories, like losing trusted stories, like how." Again, not fun topic.
So why don't you set up what the book is about?
Got it. You're like, whoa, don't go. But
hold on, before we get too far down, let's set it up. This is where you can go ahead and take a look at the marketing notes and
yeah. Well, so I can say
stuff.
What we've distilled like for kind of our like talking point is that the Author Immortal is a literary fantasy about what happens when you outgrow a story you love, but it won't let go. And for me, that really means just this idea that I think we've all grappled with of there are stories we've grown up with that we love and care about that the authors who've created them have maybe diverged from our path of morality, have straight up been canceled or fallen from grace. And we live in a world where art has been very commodified. Like a lot of AI storytelling is like causing a lot of distrust in stories, and people have kind of like forgotten what stories are about and for. And this is a huge point for me in terms of just like teaching and talking about stories. But like stories are supposed to be like our blueprints to live. Like this is supposed to teach us something and take from it. And what happens when that gets corrupted? And in also a portal fantasy world, what happens to a story world that was a pure, exciting place where you could visit and live in a fantasy? What happens when that gets corrupted and falls apart? Like, how does that affect the real world, and what kind of crazy things come from that? And at the core, we have a character named Hector Ramirez, who is a failed writer who basically gets offered a chance to reboot his favorite story from when he was a kid, these kind of forgotten fantasy novels from the late 50s. And he agrees to do it, but quickly stumbles into the fact that, hey, the world of these stories is real and has kind of been poisoned, and he gets pulled into it. And again, we have some kind of classic portal fantasy genre stuff in there as well that quickly becomes its own thing as well. But so it's a bit of like a kind of like multi-armed beast, but really it comes from that idea of like, hey, like, what does authorship mean? What does it mean to create something and control it? And do you control it as an author? Like, are we kind of in control of the stories we read and how we're affected by them or where they go? And a lot of it is like discourse that's been around, like death of the author is a big thing of like, oh, like when you release a piece of work, like it no longer belongs to you. The author should be deaded away from it. And obviously there's a lot of different opinions on this based on where it goes. And our book is not offering hard solutions to any of these questions, but these are the questions that really drove me. And it's funny because we joke like almost so many bands, like their second records will be about touring, which can sometimes feel a little closed off to the fan because like most fans don't like go tour. But like, I think it's very common for writers to want to write about writing. And that's why like I was like, oh, but I really want to find something unique and something that feels a little more universal. And as I said, seeing Morgan's work gave me like, I think the confidence to really dive deep into this because She is just a hugely talented artist. Like, again, does full watercolor, but is so good at acting. And I knew if I was going to do a character driven book, because at the core of this book is a relationship between a father and his kid, and many fathers and their children, and just this idea of almost like, is a parent an author? Like, and what does it mean when your kid doesn't want to live the script you wrote for them? Like, is that good? Is that bad? Like, so lots of just kind of layers of that metaphor that we kept finding, which was great. So it was a very organic process once I got Morgan on board, and she thankfully liked the pitch and was excited by the story, which is always the first, like, okay, I don't feel like an idiot. Like, it's giving you this document.
Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about like that kind of collaboration because it feels like this is not something usually, that sometimes happens with a writer-artist duo, but it feels like you guys worked a lot of it out once you got to know one another and do it. So I'd love to maybe hear some of the things that maybe did change, like that you initially had thought that maybe changed once talking to Morgan and stuff about it, and just like, did any of it reframe maybe how you maybe originally planned the story to go?
Excuse me. It is interesting because, as I said, it was this little pitch, like almost in the back of my head, that I didn't really build out. And especially when we started talking about, like, could this be an ongoing series? Like, what's the larger mythology? And really, one, just as I said, seeing just like the quality and like acting in Morgan's work made me think like, hey, we can sell the human characters of this story. Like, we don't need to worry that it's not immediately so crazy and surreal. Like, Morgan can find the small, like, beautiful moments just in interactions. And that gave me the confidence to do a book that was a little more, not ostentatious, but sometimes, again, you want to like just hit people over the head with like bombast and craziness. And again, I think a lot of my work has been very genre and very loud up front, but that really helped sell just like also who the characters were to me once I saw Morgan start drawing them. Like, oh my gosh, like I can really, again, it sounds contrived, but like, oh, these people kind of feel real to me now. I see the way you're having them act and how they respond to things. But then second, just Morgan's design work. And I joke about this all the time that I love writing comics because I write full script. So again, I'll write like panel 1, XYZ, like panel 2, and like character descriptions. But I've learned in a little bit with games too of like, they say like you squint, like you don't overly visualize, because if you think of what the page is going to look like or what someone is going to look like too hard, you're going to be disappointed or feel friction when the art comes in. So I try to really not overly visualize, but what I joke to Morgan is like, my writer brain sees the crappiest versions of things. Like there's a character in our book who is a wizard, and I just saw like shitty Gandalf in the back of my head, like, which feels terrible. And again, also, illegal. We can't use Gandalf's likeness. But when Morgan designed that character, like, she gave him like a crazy like veil and like just completely so far from anything I would have imagined. But I love it, and it feels like ours. And her design work like that is constantly coming forward. Like we have a character called the Harlequin King who comes later, who in my mind just like looked like a mime. And then like Morgan designed him like as like a crazy bird. Like he is a bird with a mask that's like almost like clutched between his mouth. And like so much of that world building now like feels like ours and just not generic fantasy because of the design work. And even in the preview pages, like creatures we call ink angels, like I write like, hey, it's an ink angel. Like it's a dark monster made of ink. What's that going to look like? And Morgan has come up with this iconic, great design, and stuff from there really helped me, because then we're doing this as an ongoing series. And as I said, it's inspired by those early Vertigo ongoings I really loved. So like, yes, in a perfect world, we'd love to do this for 60, 70 issues and go on. And never know what's going to happen, but we are at least shooting for that in our brain. So we're not trying to structure it with like closed off endings or ways out. So it does, again, the book feels like there's something bigger there. And that's very intentional to us, because we think that's very important to monthly readers. Like we want you to be excited to come get it month to month and not know where it's going and see the path forward. And so much of the kind of, I guess what we'll call world building and like deeper story lore, like is under the surface and set up to be delivered later, which has been transformative for me because we've spent time on this ahead of it. which is great, versus like you're just being in the monthly grind of like, oh my God, I need to write a script, and like you'll have some bullet points, but like we have put a ton of thought into where this is going, how the story ends, what we're building to. And I think I learned a lot of that also in games too, as I had to do a lot of documentation about, again, full ass character arcs, like where things are heading, like what the structure of this is. And bringing that to our own series has been so, so exciting and rewarding. And I think taking it to a place where I'm very confident in the pacing of it. And again, I obviously I read modern comics. I'm excited by them. And I think there's a lot of great ongoings going on, especially at Image right now. And I think people are very keyed into that mode of storytelling and want something like that again. And it's really been transformative to how we approach the book. And I think I've wandered so far from the question now.
But it's interesting you mentioned the game part. So like, does the work that you did, like having to do all of that, documentation, as you said, did that make it easier to scale this project?
A bit, and I will mention that we also have an editor on the book named Arden Ripley, who, again, is an independent editor and someone who my friend introduced me to, and they are very much a story editor, which is fantastic. So they will actually go over my scripts with me, talk about what's there, and be that first line of defense along with Morgan to like, does this make sense? Does this happen? And that is a transformative experience for me as a writer, as there are different tiers of editing in comics and everything, where like sometimes your editor is just kind of running the schedule and like filling out your vouchers. Sometimes they're giving you notes that you may or may not agree with. But with Arden, it is really, as I said, someone to literally check me and talk through things and work out. And it has been so, so useful and made the book so much better than me just like, I wrote a script and sent it to Morgan and she's going to draw it now. And that is a process, again, that I think I've humbly come to in games, having very good narrative directors who I worked with who would actually talk through with me. Because again, I came from like, hey, I could write a comic book by myself. Shut up. No one needs to tell me what to do. I shipped 18 issues of Five Ghosts and Dead of Violent Love, no editor, whatever. And just that sense of collaboration has made the story so much stronger and so much more interesting. And it seems so obvious, but like, trust me, when you're a creative person deep in this stuff, you don't always have it so easily in front of you. And and having obviously Morgan as well as someone who reads the scripts, and Morgan is not a like, we'll talk through high level story stuff, but I think she likes to be surprised by the scripts when she gets them as well. So I don't typically say what we're doing, but going back to what you said though, I have typically been a person who does like all my world building stuff in my head and I don't write it down, and I feel like I just know it. But having learned from games like how important documentation is when you have other people on the team who need to see it, I came into this and really did that same kind of exercise of like, hey, let me write out what I think, like, even if we never get to it, here's the macro story that we would build towards. Here's complete character arcs that maybe we'll take years to see, but where we're trying to go. Here's like the mystery, like here's the answer to the mystery. Right. Here's things like that. And doing that before we were making the book has been so helpful. Another huge touchstone for me is Lock and Key by Joe Hill and my God, I cannot remember people's names. Gabriel, what is his last name? I'm gonna look. He's a fantastic artist who I fucking love, and I'm truly killing myself. Don't tell me about the TV show. Tell me about Rodriguez. Yes, my mother's made it. I was gonna say not that and look like a fool, but yes, Gabriel Rodriguez is fantastic. But I remember them talking about that book, which I love intensely, that kind of unfurls into this long form story where they didn't know if they were going to do it for that long. And in the first 5 issues, like they're like little seeds they have that they didn't necessarily think were huge setups that they started identifying when they knew they were going to do a second series. And we're able to build all these great imagery and metaphor and like setups and payoffs, like, and just, I remember reading about that process and being like, oh, that's really smart. Like, that's the stuff that readers will notice. Like, again, like a hairbrush in issue 2 that just seems like a throwaway thing, like will come back and be important. And that's the kind of thing we've aspired to. And having that organization up front and just knowing like what we're going for. And again, it's also a reason why, like, I love being at Image, where we say like, hey, we want to do this as an ongoing series. We're going to do it as an ongoing series. And I think the big aspirational thing I will say is like, I am chasing that recreating for other people, that high that I got when I really was loving comics, of just like wanting to read my comics in the parking lot, like being so excited by what was happening month to month, that like I would be at the comic store and like literally read something in the car because I want to know what happened. And like that's kind of our like litmus. And I don't know if we'll get there, hopefully, like can't guarantee that, but that's the kind of like just like month to month storytelling we want. We want to be writing a book that people are excited to get to, that again is everyone probably thinks that, but truly like having the time to sit back and really think about the books I loved and the stories I loved. It was these like kind of like macro unfolding long form series. And I just feel so fortunate at this point that we stumbled into something that we're super passionate about, feels personal, has the right team, and just has the longevity. Because one thing I never wanted to do as a creator is kind of like force a small idea into a big frame like that, where like, oh, like this is something that probably could be done in 3 issues, but we're going to do it for 60. Like, good luck, because I just don't think that fosters good natural storytelling. But we really feel fortunate with the Author Immortal that it's so much that we all personally care about and are able to extrapolate, like that it will make for a good long run. And that being said,
go for it.
You might be segueing us better than I was going to awkwardly. So,
well, I think like this is a book that clearly feels incredibly personal, in a way. Like there is your mission, your mantra for this book, like feels very like it crystal clear, right? That said, what are you hoping fans take away from the book then, right? Because like you are going ahead and putting this out there, and you're doing all of the work in trying to explain all of these things, but inevitably at the end of the day, what are you hoping fans, like I said, just kind of take from it?
It's been fun because we're at a point where people who are not me and the team have read it, thankfully, and given feedback. And one thing that's been a delight is like, I forget how much horror DNA there is in the book. Because again, I always just think of it as a straight fantasy book. But Morgan, the one thing Morgan had said to me when we started working together was she wanted to draw some like fucked up monsters, as she had just done a fantastic YA book. But like, it's very like grounded and just like natural, like scenes in a high school. And she was like, I really want to draw crazy stuff again as well.
I need to let loose.
Yeah. And it's funny because I never think of that, but like literally we just, someone at the Beat reviewed it and like straight up was like talking about like the tension in the horror scenes and how creepy stuff is. I'm like, oh wow. Yeah, we did get there, because I've been living up in conceptual land of like, oh my God, here are the things I'm worried about. And two, like I'm really happy. And I think Morgan's acting has gotten this across, that it's funny. Like the characters are immediately likable. And I think more so than anything I've ever written, as I said, I can look through this, and I don't mean this narcissistically, but like looking at the art, like I can see who these people are, and that they're, again, they feel alive in a way that is really fun for me as a writer. And it's a cliche of like, oh, it feels like your stuff comes alive at some point and you're no longer just putting words in their mouth. And we got there very fast, which has been fantastic. And truly, by design, I know, like I say, we have this crazy plan, but just remembering that it's new for people every month. Like we know all the reveals, we know where everything's heading. And that's one thing I love about comics, especially monthly comics, that you get that feedback. You get to see people reading it piece by piece and how they react. And as I said, while there are a lot of big thematic questions at the heart of the book, like the reason it's good art is we're not telling you the answer. We're not trying to be didactic and like push stuff down your throat, but like this is the stuff that drives us. And we really feel like in the modern market, like these questions drive people, like, and again, especially like recovering fantasy readers who don't know where to go, who maybe haven't read comics. Like we're hoping this could be a good bridge book for them. Like people who, again, want to read something a little more illustrative, who maybe are burned out on like house styles. I think Morgan's work is phenomenal. And again, I can't praise enough. I think this book will make Morgan very, very famous, I hope. And she deserves it, as she is a true craftsperson who is just like doing work that's so good. And I feel being able to see like the original pages and see stuff as it comes in, I always feel spoiled. But really, as I said, just chasing that fun experience of like, oh, I want to read a nice long monthly book where I don't know where it's going, but I know it's going to be around for a while, and it's not going to have just quick solutions in one day be, bye, we're wrapping up because we don't want to do it anymore. Well, I don't think people stop because they want to do it anymore. but just like know that there's a plan and know there's an intent and we built it this way versus like, because I've been on every end of the spectrum. Like I've written stuff that got canceled early. I've written stuff that got extended, and it can just feel you want to do your best work and you want to make stuff that feels organic, but the reality of it can be so tricky. And then you have like 10 different artists coming in and the book never looks consistent. So again, I'm very excited and proud to have a book that we're locking in the team. Like Morgan and I are going to do every main issue. Like maybe we'll get to a point.
The first issue is 40 pages.
Yes. Someone was reading it where they were like, how long is this book? And I'm like, listen, well, and this is something that if you've read my other Image books, Five Ghosts and Violent Love both have 32-page first issues. Because I'm very passionate about the idea that when we're asking someone to put their money down and get invested in a new world, like I want to give you as much as we humanly can. Like we kind of make this argument to you, like this is why you should care. And I love that we got to the point of where we did in our first issue. And again, subtle spoiler, but as I said, there's a fantasy world, there's a portal fantasy, like pseudo isekai in our story. And I feel like in the bad version of the book, you're there on page 5. And I know that can happen sometimes where people just have to rush to the I just made like a chest thumping like heart attack. But we want to take our time and really pace it out and make sure you understood the characters, what's going on, but still give you that fun reveal. Like it's funny. I was talking to Matt Rosenberg. Like I just did his podcast, and that will probably, I think it'll literally like went up as we were speaking. But he was like, "Oh, I was reading this first issue." I'm like, "Oh, is this just like a graphic novel?" But then he's like, "Oh no, I got to the end." I'm like, "No, it's a comic book with like a cliffhanger and things like that." But having that extra space really just like helped me breathe. And like I will constantly do it, and I'll look and be like, "Oh my gosh, can you imagine if we cut off on page 22? Like it would have been like so little." And again, we're excited to give people a nice big chunky piece of the story up front to get them involved. And it took some doing. Like it felt like it took forever on our part. But again, we are also nice and ahead. We're very committed to kind of keeping a schedule, keeping monthly, and we've all done enough books to know what we're capable of. And again, I know, don't mean to be too brass tacks with readers, but like we don't want to disappear and expect people to like come back 6 months from now when we should rear our heads again. As I said, it's designed really to create that feeling that I loved as a comics reader, and I hope people can get that from our book. So
I love that. Last question for you, and it's probably going to be a bit of a existential one, but I'd love to see.
I won't talk for 40 minutes about it, then I promise you.
Well, okay, so let's say your protagonist Hector could sit down with young Frank. What advice do you think he'd give?
It's interesting because I feel like there's layers to that as in the beginning of our story when he's just kind of living his not great life where he's forced to be an adjunct teacher and not a writer of like, hey, set realistic goals. like life is hard, take the hits. And again, but then also this is going to feed into my own views because it's happened, but like life is also like crazy and unexpected and things happen and opportunities arise that you would never see coming, and everything can change so quickly and for better and worse. Like, but optimistically, I tend to be an optimist. And as I said, I think I started this very much saying like, hey, the luckiest day of my life was when Eric approved our book, and creating a moment like that in our story is really funny and like cathartic a little bit. It doesn't end as well, hopefully, as mine does, but really just the idea that like, hey, you never know what's going to happen. Like you never know when your interests are going to collide or someone from your life is going to resurface and things are going to change. And listen, I won't be too romantic and say I think that's beautiful, but that is truly like, again, being open to the universe and things like that. But again, it is funny because as someone who is finding success but not the success they want, I think that's a very relatable, cathartic thing, and sure. I think everyone needs to hear that sometimes, that you're not a failure just because you're not doing the big shiny thing you think you should be doing.
Man, I could think of no perfect place to end this conversation. That is it. We put a nice tidy bow on it. and we are ready to rip and ship. Author Immortal is out. Depending on when you listen to this, it may be out already, and if it has, go pick it up and read it. And if it's not, that you need to go tell your retailer you need at least 3 copies of this book. There are great variants on this, so definitely go check those out. But this is, he said, look, Frank wants to be here for Frank is going to be here for the long haul on this book. So make sure that you are ready to get locked in for an adventure. Frank, man, like you said, like people coming in and out of your lives and getting the chance to reconnect. I'm glad we got to do this.
Absolutely, no, an absolute joy. Please, it's always fun to talk about something versus just like, send some bullet points.
Right. So there you go. So, man, Frank, thank you again, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you so much.
Well, that does it for another episode of Let's Talk Comics. Thank you again to Frank for spending some time with us, and thank you, whatever you're doing. If you're taking a walk, you're in the car, maybe you're just sitting at home and enjoying the conversation. Wherever and however you listen to this show is always appreciated. And I love that you guys have been leaving reviews and you've been sharing your screenshots to show some of that appreciation for the show. It warms my heart every single time that you do. All right, go pick up the Author Immortal. If you haven't, go pick up 5 Ghosts. It's a great read. And so that's going to do it for us today. I'm not going to keep you guys too much longer. You know what to do. You know the business. Go buy comics. Go read comics so we can keep talking about them. We'll catch you next time, guys.